Now that we're moving right along in our series, let's talk about some more complicated topics. The next thing we should talk about is creating a molded part. Now, this is by far one of the most common topics you see when users are trying to get into designing their own parts in 3D. Most of the time, you're not going to be the guy that's making the physical mold, but you're designing the parts, and the work that you put in on the ground level can make the rest of the job much easier for not only you, but also the tooling house and production down the line. So there are a few things that we need to understand when we talk about design intent or planning for your molded parts. Really, the first thing you need to understand is the limitations of whatever you're using in terms of your final process, whether it's blow molding or injection molding or any other type of roto molding or anything that you guys need to get into. There's so many different types of technologies out there available. The first step is to consult whatever company you're going to be using to make your final molds or the short-term molds and figure out what their limitations are. Now, the reason I say this is because there are several different types of, for instance, injection molding. You have a lot of short run or pre production type of injection molding houses. These are ones that use aluminum tooling, so they're only set up to do between 100 and 500 parts. They don't use liquid cooled molds, and typically their restrictions in terms of side pulls or geometry that they can get away with are much more limited than, say, a full production run that's going to crank out thousands of these things a day. So when you talk about the final tool house that's going to be doing the job and knowing their limitations, that can go a long way in how you design your part. The last thing anybody wants to do is spend hours, days, weeks, months designing a part, spending all that time fitting all the little details in, getting everything just right, to find out that it can't be manufactured. So that's the big thing that we want to avoid and we want to understand going in. So the design intent is really what the part needs to do, what it needs to hold, what its function is, and so on. And the reason the design intent is important, not only from a design aspect and figuring out how pieces move and work and so on, but it also helps you plan things like wall thickness that you need, or material selection, or whatever the end application is. Things like that really go a long way because if your end application is a part that sits outside or it sits in the sun or the weather, it's going to be a very drastic difference in terms of wall thickness and construction and draft angle and just the overall quality of the part, as opposed to something that's going to be very small, very consumer, handheld based, and so on. These are all things that we're going to talk about a little bit, but if you want more information on molded design, or if you actually want to get into making your own molds, we've done two prior series dealing with this topic on the O'Reilly website. Let's take a look at one of them. The first one is the SolidWorks molded part design. Now, in this series, I went ahead and talked about the design process specifically for drafted parts, whether it's a molded part, plastic, or if it's a cast part, anything that needs draft. We're going to talk about it in this series. This is a series where we go over some examples. You can look at the table of contents here, and we talk about different ways to make parts, different ways to add draft, and really dive deeper into all the different fastening features, vents, and slides, and all kinds of things that you need to know for your molded parts. There's also a series that I did on mold tools because the SolidWorks program actually has a suite of mold tools that help you design and manufacture your molds. Now, even if you're not going to be making your own molds, and typically that's reserved for the company that's going to be producing your files, but it's still a good idea to get familiar with those tools, see where their limitations are, and see where it might change how you design your parts. So both of these courses are available from the Shop O'Reilly website. You can find them, you can navigate to the SolidWorks files there and figure out if these courses will add something to you. Because of course, the series that we're doing now is a basic course. It's an introduction course, and we're not going to be going into depth in a lot of these topics. So if you need more information on things like mold tools or designing molded parts, certainly check those videos out.